So the first question is the translation done with AI? Because we don't know, right? We can't hear it. So we're wondering if we can have a confidential conversation right now. So Scott, GenAI has been around for 2 years at least. The hype has been around for at least 2 years. Machine learning and self-learning models have been around for quite some time. What would you say are the concerns today compared to, I guess we didn't have any concerns prior to today, so everybody's talking about it today. So what would be the concerns today?
I think there's several concerns you got to think about. Number one would be the mass advancement of tools, right? If you think about, generative AI specifically, there hasn't been a lot of advancements over the last 30 years, if you will. Suddenly we found new techniques to be able to combine multiple data sources, meaning that it was very binary. You took text, or you took video, or you took audio. Now you can combine all those things together and aggregate them from endless amounts of sources. So again, all that information we've been freely putting up on the web is now aggregated into a lot of AI that we see today, which is a huge advantage if you use it for good, but on the other side of it, with tool sets, you can also leverage that for bad as well.
Are we seeing a lot of employees that are sleeping under their desk and watching Netflix while the work gets done above? Or you want to comment on that? Ben, you talk to a lot of CIOs and CISOs and executives. What are their concerns today?
Sure. And can you just confirm you guys can hear us okay? It's quite loud up here. You guys are good? Louder? Okay, great. So I talked to a lot of CIOs and CISOs who have two concerns. One is that they know that people are using GenAI already, but they have no way of knowing the scope of how they're using it and what the risks pose to the organization. The second thing is, if you do adopt GenAI, right, so if you want to take it away from being a shadow IT applications to an application, how do you make sure people only use it correctly and use the correct GenAI, right? So there's two different risk factors there. One, people can use any sorts of GenAI they want today, and it's very hard to block it at a firewall level because they coexist and cohabitate the same URLs and domains as other applications. So if you allow Microsoft 365, you allow Copilot. If you allow Google and YouTube, you allow Gemini. So people know that it's allowed today, but there's no visibility to sort of to wrangle around what is the risk of the use today. And now if you decide to say, okay, we're going to use Copilot, how do you ensure they're using the right Copilot and not the personal Copilot, right? The risk of data loss is high with GenAI. So of course you sign a contract with Copilot to say our data won't be used to train your model in our corporate Copilot, but as soon as someone opens a tab and goes to a different Copilot or someone else's different account, all those agreements go out the window and you lose control of your data. So I think it's a mix of there's no visibility in who's using GenAI, and if you want to use GenAI, how do you control it effectively?
Right. Well, Scott, then how can you discern if your users are using it, and then how do you wrap your head around that to make sure they use it correctly?
Well, it really depends on the medium that you're talking about. There's multiple different types of media. It can be either using it to communicate over something like Slack or Teams, but also via email. GenAI is still kind of in its infancy, if you will, so there's a lot of patternistic features around it. So as you look at a whole data set or a very, very large LLM, you can use tool sets to actually discern if something is written in GenAI. For instance, my whole team loves to send me nice emails, but I can promise you none of them write like that. But the other side of it is that you really don't have a way to touch every single median, and it goes back to what you were talking about, is that depending on if you are, how can I say, using something like a Slack internally, there is not going to be a way today that an organization can discern if they're using generative AI, because they could generate it from a localized machine, copy, paste, drop it into a third-party median, and send it out. So that makes it very, very challenging. But when you're thinking about it from a security perspective, it's very, very patternistic. So as long as you are looking at a large enough data set and understanding those patterns, you can use tool sets to discern if something is written by a human, partially by a human, or holistically by GenAI.
Right, so I could be using it on my phone and actually cut and pasting it between my phone and my computer. So it's very difficult to detect. But shouldn't we be training users, perhaps, instead of letting them roam freely and do their own thing?
We absolutely should be training users, but that's like herding cats in some realities, if you think about it, right? Because if going back to Ben's statement, is you can use appropriate AIs for your organizations that will really offer a ton of benefit. However, you can't stop somebody from picking up their cell phone whenever you block it from them and using their own, right? I have probably 9 different chatbots on here. Some are controlled and gated and, let's say, ethical, and some are not. but I can use any of those, and there's nothing my organization can do to keep me from copying, pasting, and putting that inside of anything public.
Interesting. Well, Ben, the first question was, what are CIOs and executives concerned about? But the real question when we're talking to an expert is, what should they be concerned about?
I think what they should be concerned about is, traditional cybersecurity hygiene. So GenAI it's a new trend, of course, but the problem it solves is not new, right? We called it shadow IT 10 years ago, right? Just using applications that are unapproved by the organization where you can lose data. So while we want to focus, of course, and come to panels on GenAI, there's really just like basic cybersecurity hygiene that solves GenAI and other problems of shadow IT, right? If we control where data can flow, who can access what services, we solve GenAI and solve shadow IT. So people have been kicking the can down the road for a long time of implementing solutions to control shadow IT. GenAI is just one more use case, right? There's a whole bunch of GenAI issues, but what I'm talking about is controlling GenAI is the same as controlling shadow IT. So there are solutions like CASBs, secure web gateways, that have solutions that control the flow of data from users to SaaS applications. The way we look at the GenAI problem from a cybersecurity sort of access control perspective is the same way you control people accessing personal email and Dropbox. They're the same. They're sites you go to where people put data. The risk is different, and I should say the risk in GenAI is almost lower than traditional shadow IT. GenAI is abstract. I'm going to give you data, and it might be used in a language model to train a model. Maybe your data may appear somewhere, versus if I go to Google Drive or Dropbox, my data will absolutely be used by someone else and be stolen or leaked, right? So the GenAI problem is actually like we're playing it at 11 right now, but there are other issues that are more important. But the good news is the solution for both is the same, right? We don't need GenAI specific solutions. We need SaaS access control solutions.
Yeah, I like your example. So obviously structured data is more interesting from a criminal point of view than data that's sort of spread out all over the place. So yeah. So Scott, we're going to have a quick discussion about good AI versus bad AI. I remember 7 years ago, at DEF CON, there was a huge project with DARPA, and they had invested millions of dollars with university researchers to put together a challenge where they had a stack of computers basically mounting an attack on another stack of computers with no human intervention, and they were basically trying to capture the flag, and the good computer was trying to self-defend. So the first one would find 0 days, new exploits. The other one was supposed to detect that it's being violated and auto-patch itself and things of that nature. This was very futuristic. Millions of dollars were invested. Not everybody can invest millions of dollars. So how can we use good AI to fight bad AI?
Absolutely. I think a lot of it is turned from a different approach, right? Like we've been kind of looking at the edge perimeter and only considering, again, going back to like a binary look at security, if you will. Now we're starting combining multiple techniques. It's not only looking at just like IOCs or threat intelligence, it's also behavior, identity, also contextual understanding, and combining all three of those techniques together, you can get a better understanding of exactly, what is the approach and how is it evolving in front of you.
Okay. So, Ben, GenAI we're talking about one risk, right? We're talking about that one single risk, but it's not necessarily scalable as one risk. There are so many risks around that. So what does the future hold as we evolve? Because we're still looking at it from a very short window, very small window, which is today, and what's happening next year? Yeah,
and I think it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, is that to solve GenAI, we want a repeatable pattern of solving these use cases, right? We don't want a solution that solves just GenAI. I think we want to peel back the layers. What we're worried about is data leakage, data protection, who accesses data. There's all sorts of technologies out there that are hot right now, like data security posture management, right? Understanding where data is in your organization and building policies that track data and allow data to go from A to B or B to C, right? So I think we should be building repeatable patterns that track data and allow them to go to websites, right? And GenAI is the hottest use case of that right now. But like I said earlier about shadow IT, this is prevalent across every application, right? So if we're talking about GenAI, remind your CIO, your CISO about the thousands of other applications in which the same thing is occurring today at an even a wider scale.
Okay, so we have two companies here, basically two different types of profile. One, Abnormal Security, basically takes a look at emails, figures out all the evil stuff that's going on there. And I know from experience that when you drop your stuff onto a network, you always find stuff. And Netscope, well, you're data loss prevention in a sense, right? You're trying to look at where all your data is. And I think both of those have challenges because you have to tweak these models in order to get the benefit out of it. Like data leakage, for example, the first challenge is usually, well, how am I supposed to tell a system what my valuable data is? Most companies have zero classification policies. Their data is just piled up on top of each other. It's not like it's the military. I know the military guys are here. They're probably very proud because every document has a classification on the bottom, right? But nobody really does that. So how do we tweak these models in order to get the absolute benefit? You know, maybe it's easier for email in a sense because you can sort of take a look at everything that's coming in and generate something. But when it comes to the company secret, the Coca-Cola recipe, right, don't you have to give it the recipe for it to know that it's walking out the door?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I mentioned kicking the can down the road. Data protection is something people keep kicking the can down the road because, like you said, if you're not the military, if you're not dealing with state secrets, if you're not a bank, identifying what is sensitive data, like what can go to GenAI and what cannot, what's good to share, what's bad to share, is very hard for an organization. So it's not for everybody, but there's things you can do so that don't let perfection be the enemy of good, right? People are just saying we don't classify data yet, so let's not try to protect data. There's steps you can take where you can get 80, 90, 95% of the way towards protecting your data without data classification, without data governance. So some of those things could be just better access control. So I mentioned earlier today that traditionally in a network firewall, when you allow Office 365, I mentioned you're allowing everything, including Copilot. What if we could have a policy that says, allow Office 365 but not Copilot, or allow Copilot but only when it's the instance that belongs to an organization, right? So now we're reducing the surface area of data risk, that you can't put data, regardless of what it is, in the wrong LLMs, where the data will be lost, right? So better access control. And data loss prevention, for many organizations, is a dirty word, because when you have a false positive, and you block something that's legitimate, all hell breaks loose, people get really upset. I've heard stories of a CFO trying to submit their financial results to their investor relations portal and being blocked at 5 o'clock Eastern at close of market, right? You don't want to block that transaction. So what if we had models where we pause a transaction in flight and we tell the CFO, hey, we looked at this might be the wrong thing to do you want to proceed? Are you sure? So we don't make it a binary allow block. It's a slider, and we say, what you as the user, you have the ultimate decision to decide if this is good or bad. And you have to kind of trust people, but we find ultimately that most of the time the user makes the right decision, right? So you move it away from a binary, regular expression of what is sensitive, what is not, into something fuzzy, and people generally make the right decision, right?
I did not know you were doing that. That's actually pretty cool. I like that. I'm going to argue that I don't like trusting users, but you're right. If you put a pop-up up and you say, do you realize you're about to do this, Yeah, exactly. So or blocking it, in that case, would be a catastrophe. So what about for email, the email context?
So I don't think it's much indifferent, to be honest with you, because the real kind of turn here is taking an inside-out approach. Like if you look at historical email security, it's a very binary. It's a box that you kind of train at what you're doing. When you're looking at the way that we're doing techniques, it's more of understanding who you are from an internal perspective. Who are your users? What do they do? What do they touch? What type of files do they touch inside their cloud? So again, it may not be direct classification, but we can understand what those normal behavioral patterns are and then tie them back to the way that they communicate internally. So for instance, if you sent me an email that said, hey, I'm going to quit in 2 weeks, right? It can put you on a risk list. If you start touching files all over the organization going, that's pretty interesting, why are you doing that? We can automatically shut things down. So I think really the answer is, data classification or keeping things kind of, how can I say, inside of our own house is understanding how we operate specifically as an organization, as opposed to continually trying to define what is classified information, what is this? You just kind of have to learn it from the inside out, if you will.
I like that. Very interesting way of doing it. So, for both of you, how long does it take to actually deploy something and get benefit out of it?
So we could deploy in a matter of 60 seconds. It takes about 7 days for us to look back, learn forward, and we can go live in 10 days.
Okay, so you guys plug right into the API.
Plug right into the API, correct.
Okay. So basically, but from a configuration point of view, let's be realistic. The glossy always says, it's so easy. But is it?
It really is. There is zero configuration. I mean, minus adding something like an SPF record or something like that, but there's no MX changes, no journal fees, no transport rules. In fact, there's not a single thing to build inside of the platform, because like I mentioned, it goes back historically in time to understand who your users, departments, and how your company operates, so it normalizes hundreds of models almost instantaneously, so whenever you come out of the box, you're already sitting at an extraordinarily low false positive rate, and working with an organization, you can find some of those outliers, those interesting ways your CEO likes to use crazy free mails. Yeah, we can get around that, but outside of that, it's pretty automated.
Okay, and how about you?
NETSKOPE's a bit more complex, but I will say that, so I mentioned earlier, one of the things that CIOs don't know is they don't know the scope of the problem. So it does take some effort to get our technology in a point where it's blocking and preventing, but the visibility you get day one. Right, so right now, and we do these reports for customers all the time, where we'll run a report to say, did you know, out of 1,000 employees, 400 of them are using GenAI today across 12 different services using 100 different accounts. So right away, we can get that scope of that sort of equation of risk, right, of how much volume of data are we seeing being moved to GenAI. We see that right away. It takes time to massage it, to say, what is my sensitive data, like we talked about, and what are my access control policies, but answering the question of what are people doing, day one.
Okay, cool. And can you get reports out of that shows you categories of the type of activities that different
Absolutely.
users are, and risk levels, I'm assuming? So
Absolutely.
you can actually be proactive and determine that John in accounting is a higher risk this week, so maybe we need to talk to John?
Yeah, part of what we do is we assign risk to activities on the web. So if you've ever seen like an old Shadow IT report, if you guys remember a company called SkyHigh years ago, they're still around, but they had a technology 10, 15 years ago where they would crawl your firewall logs and tell you what Shadow IT applications people are using. At that time, there's a lot of noise. It was just drive-by usage. So there was this common thing where if you went to CNN.com, CNN had a button that said add to Reddit or start a Reddit thread from like every article, or add to Pinterest. So these logs would say, because the web page loaded the Pinterest button, it would say you have users using Pinterest. So there's all this noise, like it was all drive-by to say you have everyone's using Reddit, everyone's using Pinterest, then you'd ask everyone's like, what's Reddit? What's Pinterest? I'm not using it. So GenAI has a similar problem, is if you just go through a firewall and say who's accessing Gemini or ChatGPT, you'll see drive-by usage. So you'll have a report, I guarantee this is 100% of people are using GenAI. But the reality is, are they going and logging into the website and putting data in the prompt? And that's very different. So we have the visibility of both. We'll say, 100% of your users have visited or driven by a ChatGPT or GenAI website. 20% have submitted data to a prompt. And then we want to get to a point where we then come up with a percentage of how much of that is sensitive to your organization. That's the part that takes a little bit more massaging, but getting to that point of actually showing you who's using it in a risky way is very, very quick.
Right, and it can be embedded in all sorts of other products, so, so it can be very under the radar, basically, and you won't know, right? So
that's right.
Okay.
And there's applications, like I use a third-party mail application called Spark. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. It's a third-party app, works with Gmail, Outlook. I don't think IT approves of me using it, but it has a function now where it'll automatically go through your email and summarize stuff. It sends your email, that's my corporate email, to their servers to summarize it, to show it to me. Right? Again, does IT have visibility into that? So it's not a direct GenAI service. It's not Copilot, it's not Gemini. It's some free webmail app that I downloaded on my Mac and my phone that uses LLMs in the background. So we can also report to say, here are apps that use GenAI in the background.
Well, even LinkedIn, I noticed recently, to start writing a message, and it says, do you want me to make you less stupid? And it'll rewrite it for you and make it sound better. So, do we have any questions? We have two experts in two different fields, data loss prevention and email, everything that's email sterility, for lack of a better term. Any questions from the audience?
Young man?
No? So what would you like to say to the future managers, going forward? What should be their next concerns?
Again, I'm a big fan of data security, right? Identifying data and tracking where it goes. It's a skill set that's underserved right now. So I know that, obviously we're a data loss prevention company. We focus a lot on that. A lot of our customers go through a challenge where they try to scale up their team. They try to hire people who know about data loss prevention or DLP. There's not a lot of people in the market that know this technology. So I would say if someone's starting out in the industry, that's a really great thing to focus in on, is DLP and data governance. So and if you're not that person starting in the industry, if you're a manager, start building that skill set in your team. It will become critical.
For me, it's don't be afraid. Like, it's coming. It's here. It's not going away. It's going to be something we're going to have to embrace. So learn about it. Get out there and educate yourself with all the different models you can and how it can benefit you in your everyday job. For instance, for me, like I love taking EULAs and dropping them in GenAI. Why? I can say for me specifically, Scott DELUKE as a director of sales engineering, why is this important to me? And it will summarize that for me. There's no personal data or anything else I can use, but it just saved me 2-3 hours of reading something. So what I'm kind of getting at is that there's a lot of fear mongering around GenAI, and I think it's going to do a lot of good, and actually more good than bad, but it is going to be part of both worlds. So just make sure you educate yourself, use appropriate LLMs. Don't plug into free LLMs like this guy. I think he just fired himself. No, I'm just kidding. But again, you know, it is something that's very, very exciting time. There's a lot of questions here. So keep asking them, keep showing up, keep coming to these things. While you do hear some redundant information, there is always going to be something new to explore and something new to learn. So just keep an open mind and enjoy them when you can, because they're awesome to go on choose your own adventures with your children at night, and it's much easier than reading a book.
Well, who here reads the license agreements on software products? Because I think we just found a nice trick. Yeah, sure you do. You read all 1,400 pages. Because I think that's a cool trick. You just paste it in there and say, well, what's my liability on this from my point of view? So I'm going to give that a try, because I've never read a EULA. Any questions? All right, that's a wrap. Thank you, gentlemen.